Okay, so this is our today's topic, bad debts and provisions for doubtful debts. So first of all, what do we mean by bad debts? Bad debt simply means that for some reason our debtors are not going to pay us the money that they owe us. So irrecoverable debts. For some reason, your debtors will not give you your money and that money will be lost, and that's a loss for our business. So bad debt is inherently a loss for us, and every loss that we face is going to be treated as an expense in the income statement. So bad debts or bad debts की वजह क्या हो सकती है? There could be frauds or misrepresentations. There is a possibility of death of debtors, death of debtor, or if the debtor is declared clinically insane, clinical insanity, clinical insanity, as long as that is approved by the court of law without a legal representative. Because अगर आपका डेटर की डेथ हो जाती है या वो क्लिनिकली इंसेन डिक्लेयर हो जाता है और उसका कोई लीगल रिप्रेजेंटेटिव नहीं रहा, तो फिर आप अपना डेट किससे क्लेम कर सकते हैं? बिकॉज अ डेड पर्सन और अ क्लिनिकली इनसेन पर्सन कैन नॉट डिफेंड हिमसेल्फ और हरसेल्फ in the court of law. So that is why a person who dies or a person who declares who's got declared by the court of law as clinically insane cannot defend themselves in the court of law. So that is why they are exempted from their liabilities, and whatever amount they owed you is no more relevant, and you have to write it off from your books as bad debt. And the most common reason is liquidation, or what we call bankruptcy. So your debtors may go bankrupt or their business is liquidated, and that's how they will not have any money to pay you back. And that is when your debt is going to be written off as bad. So these are a few reasons why your debtors will not pay you, and whatever amount owed by them is going to be lost, and you will treat bad debt as an expense in your income statement because that's a loss by nature. So whatever reasons that apply, eventually in accounting, every time there is a bad debt, you will just simply put it in your expenses list after the gross profit. It's an indirect expense. So you put that bad debt in this list of expenses after the gross profit as an expense. So, and that is why in order to avoid bad debts, to avoid bad debts, businesses offer discounts. Discount allowed. Remember the term discount allowed? We have seen it many times in the trial balance. Discount allowed is offered to the trade receivables or debtors, and the purpose of discount allowed is to encourage them to settle their debts earlier. सो डिस्काउंट अलाउड आपने एक टर्म ऑलरेडी देखी है ट्रायल बैलेंस में. वो डिस्काउंट अलाउड का मतलब ही बेसिकली ये होता है कि आप अपने डेटर्स को एक इंसेंटिव देते हैं दैट इफ़ दे पे बिफोर द डेडलाइन you will give them a certain percentage off, and that percentage that you give them off in order to encourage them to settle their debts earlier than they are expected, that amount is what we call discount allowed. And discount allowed is also a loss, sort of a loss by nature. That is why discount allowed is also treated as an expense in your income statement. We have been treating this discount allowed as an expense in the income statement before. We did not know a lot about it. So discount allowed, now we know, is a small amount of loss that you're willing to bear in order to avoid a bigger loss called the bad debt. So अगर मैं आपका debtor हूँ and I owe you say $100, so there is a possibility that I will go bad and you will lose the entire $100. So instead of losing $100, you give me an incentive to settle my debt earlier, और वो 10% आप मुझे ऑफ कर देंगे, तो इसका मतलब ये होगा कि I will pay you $90 in the end, and those $90 you will recover in full settlement, and the remaining $10 will be lost by way of a discount. So this small $10 discount is also sort of a loss to you, and that is why discount allowed भी आप business के अंदर as an expense treat करेंगे. और अगर खुदा न खास्ता कोई bad debt हो जाता तो वो तो खैर आपका loss है ही, that will also be treated as an expense in the income statement. So do we understand what's written on the screen right now? That bad debt is an irrecoverable debt and it's a loss for us, and that is why we treat it as an expense in the income statement. And in order to avoid a larger loss of bad debt, we may offer discounts to our debtors and encourage them, give them an incentive to settle their debts earlier, ताकि हम bad debt avoid कर सकें. But वो एक minor loss जो आपको discount की form में होगा, वो भी आपके लिए एक expense होगा. इन दोनों के अंदर जो एक चीज़ common है, and that common thing, bad debts may be or discount allowed may be, the two are common. Something is common, and that is what we call, these are non-cash expenses. These are not the type of expenses which involve a payment of cash to someone. So was the case with depreciation. Depreciation is also treated in the income statement as an expense, but that expense does not mean you have to pay cash to anyone. So depreciation, bad debts, and discount allowed, all of them, they fall into the category of what we call non-cash expenses, because they will be treated as an expense, but these are kind of different. They differ from salaries and rent and insurance and stationery type expenses, because all of these expenses involve a payment of cash to someone. But bad debts, discount allowed, depreciation, these are all expenses because they are loss by nature, not because you are going to pay cash to someone. So if we agree with this discussion, give me your feedback on the participants list. Good. Alicia, Fajr, and Minal, Madiha. Okay, Alicia's got a question. But aren't we paying the debtors cash in discount allowed? No, Alicia, we are not paying them cash. We are receiving cash from them. However, the amount of cash that we were supposed to receive will be slightly diminished. For example, if I owe you $100 cash, I am a debtor to you. So you were supposed to receive $100 cash from me. But instead of receiving $100, you will receive $95 or $90 in full settlement. And you will lose that $5 or $10. Right, good. Excellent. So this is your bad debt. Bad debt is a simple analysis. Every time you see a bad debt or an irrecoverable debt, you are going to treat it in your income statement. Now comes the other problem, and that is the provision for doubtful debts. And before provision for doubtful debts, let's take a look at, let's say our financial year begins 1st of January and it finishes 31st of December, right? At the end of the financial year, on 31st December, we have trade receivables or debtors amounting to say $10,000. Okay, so I'm going to write an expression next to it. You tell me if you agree with that or not. The trade receivables which exist at the end of the financial year, you can say these are similar to what we can say accrued income. The trade receivables simply means an accrued income. We know an accrued income means that goods or services delivered, but the cash is not received yet. So trade receivables are basically a form of accrued income. So if you agree with this expression, give me a green check, otherwise I will explain. Or a red cross, right? If you don't understand what does it mean, I'll explain it, right? Okay. Alina Sayed and Marine does. Okay, very good, Alina. Marine understands. Alina? Do you agree with, or let me just make it more clear here. Accrued sales revenue. Income or revenue means the same thing. So your trade receivables which exist at the end of the year, these are the people who owe you. Why do they owe you? Because you have sold goods to them on credit. And that means you have delivered the economic benefit to them, but they haven't settled their debt. So that means cash is yet to be received. And that is exactly how we define any accrued income, not just accrued sales income, but any income. If you have delivered the economic benefit and the cash is yet to be received, that income is what we call an accrued income, right? So your trade receivables simply at the end of the year means these are the people who owe you your money because you have already sold goods on gold. So you already have sold goods to them. So if you have sold goods to them, so that means you have already delivered the economic benefit to them. But since they haven't settled their debt yet, that means they owe you this cash, and cash is yet to be received. And that is why we can say that trade receivables are accrued sales revenue. Excellent. Very good. So now, what is the guarantee? We know that during this year, 1st of January to 31st of December, यहाँ पे बहुत सारे bad debts अगर होने हुए थे हो चुके होंगे यहाँ पे. So bad debts already happened during this year, if there were any, already happened during this year. And this 31st December पे जो आपके पास trade receivables exist कर रहे हैं, ये bad debts के बाद के trade receivables हैं. So if there were any bad debts during the year, they must have happened during this time period. So what is the guarantee that out of these trade receivables, we are going to recover all of it? So there is no guarantee that all of these debtors will settle their debts in the future. There is a possibility that some of these debtors are going to go bad in future. We don't know who and we don't know how many, but there is always a possibility that some of them are going to go bad in future. And for that, we create the provision for doubtful debt. So you can see the difference here. We use the term doubtful debts over here, whereas bad debts are not doubtful. Bad debts have already happened. You already know the debtors who have been fraudulent, or someone died, or someone declared clean. So you have identifiable people here जो कि या तो bankrupt हो गए हैं या मर गए हैं या clinically insane हो गए हैं या fraudulent prove हो गए हैं. So bad debt के अंदर कोई uncertainty नहीं होती. You already know who have gone bad. But the people who still seem to be good to you, these are the good debtors or trade receivables. But there is always a possibility that some of them are going to go bad in future. Since we don't know who's going to go bad and how much will be lost further by way of the future bad debts. So what we do is we exercise the prudence concept. The prudence concept says that if you foresee a likely loss, you should recognize it. Likely gains आप ignore करते हैं, लेकिन likely losses जो हैं वो आप recognize कर लेते हैं. And based on that assumption, you are going to create a sort of a safety cushion that you will assume that some of the $10,000 worth of these debtors are going to go bad in future, and you will make a careful estimate, just like depreciation. You will make a careful estimate that how many of these are going to go bad based on your history or based on the based on the credibility of these debtors. You are going to make an assumption, and that assumption is what we call the provision for doubtful debts. How do we calculate this assumption and how do we come to this conclusion? वो भी हम डिस्कस करते हैं. पहले मैं अलीशा का क्वेश्चन आंसर कर दूं. अलीशा ने पूछा है, Sir, is it possible for bad debts to recover? For example, a company recovers. Absolutely, Alicia. Absolutely. Bad debt recovery is also a possibility. So this chapter actually deals with bad debts and the provision for likely losses, right? There is a possibility that a previously written off bad debt can revive and can be revived, and those debtors can come back and settle their debts. So in that case, just say bad debts, as a loss, as an expense in the income statement, we treat them. So अगर bad debt recovery होगी, तो bad debt recovery will be treated as a gain or a profit, and that gain or profit will be treated in the income statement as an income. Very good, Alicia. We will come to that possibility, but towards the end of the chapter. Great, excellent. Okay, so what we do based on our careful estimates and assumptions, we create a provision for doubtful debts. And provision for doubtful debts, unlike provision for depreciation, is not a constant value. Provision for depreciation is based on non-current assets, and non-current assets stay in your business for a long period of time and they stay constant. But debtors or trade receivables, they keep on varying every month and every year. So this provision for doubtful debts is going to be a very what you can say, it's going to be a very flexible amount. It will keep on changing every year. Unlike depreciation policy जो कि आप एक बार decide कर लेते हो फिर over multiple years वो depreciation policy unchanged as is implement होती रहती है आपके records में. But provision for doubtful debts is going to be decided based on the economic climate every year, and you will keep on revising the provision for doubtful debts. So, assuming that this year's economic climate suggests that we should create a provision for doubtful debts equal to 10% of our trade receivables, that means we will calculate 10% of this value and we will arrive at this conclusion that out of this $10,000, $1,000 of doubtful debts is likely to be lost by way of future bad debts. So then we will calculate our debtors at $9,000. We call this value as good debtors, or sorry, not good debtors, net debtors. Net debtors. The net debtors means the debtors which will remain after the likely bad debts in future are carefully subtracted from there, and net debtors actually give you a certainty that even though your trade receivables amount to $10,000, however, $9,000 out of that $10,000 will be certainly received. So you actually create a provision for doubtful debts to create yourself this confidence to arrive at this value, being confident that out of those $10,000, $9,000 तो आपको in any case receive हो जाएंगे, बाकी $1,000 kind of doubtful है. So that doubtful element will be treated as provision for doubtful debts and will also be treated as a loss to you, and you will take it to the income statement as an expense. So we understand provision for doubtful debts. The basic अभी provision for doubtful debts में बहुत सारी और भी चीजें आएंगी, but for now, until this point, do we understand that provision for doubtful debts is just an estimated value? It is not the actual loss, but a forecast loss, a likely loss to the business, and that is based on a percentage. Okay, Madiha and Fajr, you understand, beta? Okay, good. Now, how do we come to this value, 10%? There are many factors that the business has to consider before they arrive at a careful amount of 10%. Amal has asked, then is 9,000 recorded in the balance sheet under trade receivables? Yes, Amal. Just like provision for depreciation is subtracted from its non-current asset, और फिर हम non-current asset को उसकी net book value पे record करते हैं after the depreciated amount has been adjusted. Exactly the same way, this is how we are going to show in the balance sheet, this section. Your balance sheet current asset section, when you show the trade receivables, you will mention those trade receivables as their original value, but then you will show a provision for doubtful debt subtracted from there, and your actual trade receivables, which are going to be counted towards the rest of the balance sheet values, will be 9,000 trade receivables. So your net debtors are going to be actually accounted for in the balance sheet, not the overall trade receivables. Just a second, right? Okay. Can you just give me a minute? Just a minute. There is some. ये एक मिनट मुझे मैं भी आ रहा हूँ. Okay. So now, how do we come to this 10% provision for doubtful debts? The factors the businesses have to consider in order to arrive at what should be an accurate value or what should be a more realistic value of a provision for doubtful debts to be created. And that is the factors, or let me title it here, factors to be considered while setting up a provision for doubtful debts. Okay, PFDD will stand for provision for doubtful debts. Okay, so the first thing is you will have to see the past trend, right? Basically, that is what you call historical analysis. The past trend or historical analysis simply means that you will look at the last 3, 4, 5 years. Okay, last 3, 4, 5 years at the end of the year, and at the end of every year, how many trade receivables were there and what proportion of those trade receivables went bad in the coming years. So based on that analysis, you are going to come to this sort of 10% provision. Let's say अगर ये 2020 है तो आप देखेंगे कि 2016 के अंदर अराउंड 5% डेटर्स जो थे वो लाइकली वो फ्यूचर में बैड हो गए थे. देन 2017 के अंदर अराउंड 7% डेटर्स जो थे वो 2018 में जाके बैड हो गए. सिमिलरली 2018 के एंड पे जो डेटर्स थे उनका कोई रफली 7.5% जो था 2019 में बैड हो गया. So based on this assumption, you know that 5% to 7.5% is your range of the debtors likely to go bad in future. So this year you're going to be extra prudent and you say, okay, fine, 10% is a good estimate. इससे ज़्यादा नहीं हो सकते bad debt, इससे कम हो जाए तो हो जाए लेकिन इससे ज़्यादा नहीं होंगे. So you create a prudent value here that these are going to be your likely bad debts based on the historical analysis or based on the past trend, right? Then there is a possibility. आप फिर क्या करते हैं, individually debtors को recognize करते हैं that आप फाइनेंशियल क्रेडिबिलिटी देखते हैं. आपके जो डेटर्स हैं $10,000 के here, right? These debtors, that's a group of debtors. So you analyze each and every debtor separately and see that उसकी फाइनेंशियल क्रेडिबिलिटी किस तरह की है. अगर एक डेटर जो है वो बहुत सारे बिजनेस के पैसे ओ करता है और उनको डिले किया जा रहा है तो मोस्ट लाइकली आपके लिए भी बैड डेट हो जाएगा एंड सो ऑन. So financial credibility is going to be analyzed in order to arrive at this 10%. Then there is another factor called age of debt, right? Age of debt means how long the debt has been pending. So अगर कोई debts ऐसे हैं जिनकी age कम है, that means वो अभी सिर्फ 2 हफ्ते या 3 हफ्ते पुराने debts हैं, तो वो आपके लिए इतनी possibility नहीं है bad होने की. लेकिन अगर एक there is a debt which is 10 months old debt and you have been trying to contact that person and that person is, sort of not really paying much attention to your efforts, so that age of debt जैसे जैसे ज़्यादा होती जाएगी वैसे वैसे there is a possibility that that person is going to go bad in future. And then there is another one, degree of, you can say, degree of economic recession. In the industry in general, right? So अगर industry in general जिसमें आप as a business operate कर रहे हैं, अगर industry किसी वजह से economic recession का शिकार है, so उस particular year के अंदर बहुत सारे businesses bankrupt होने वाले हैं. So उस साल में probably आपके doubtful debts जो हैं उनकी provision ज़्यादा होनी चाहिए. So these are a few factors that the businesses consider before arriving at this 10% value of the provision for doubtful debts. So we are not really concerned with that. We will be having our provision for doubtful debts maintenance policy, like 10% will be given to us, and we just need to learn how to implement that in the income statements. Okay, Alina Vakas says that could you explain financial credibility again? For example, Alina, there is a person who has gone bad for many other businesses, and that person happens to be your debtor as well. That person was fraudulent, let's say. So most likely he's going to go bad for you as well. So that is what financial credibility means. अगर एक शख्स है जो कि बैंक को बहुत सारे पैसे हो करते हैं, अपने क्रेडिट कार्ड के बिल्स नहीं पे कर रहा, उसकी क्रेडिट रेटिंग जो है वो बैड है, There is an institution in every country जो कि individuals की financial credibility measure करती है. वो एक सर्टन स्टैंडर्ड होता है, कोई ए ट्रिपल ए क्रेडिबिलिटी होती है, किसी की ए क्रेडिबिलिटी होती है, किसी की सी क्रेडिबिलिटी होती है. सो हर शख्स की वो क्रेडिट रेटिंग करता है बेस्ड ऑन कितने डेट्स उसने लिए और कोई कितने टाइम पे पेमेंट्स वो कर रहा है. सो बेस्ड ऑन दैट डाटा, every person has access to that data, by the way. Especially financial institutions have the data. So basically, if a person is suffering with the credibility issues and he happened to be your debtor, then most likely he's going to go bad. That's how financial credibility comes into equation here. Understood? Okay, now let's see how do we actually deal with the provision for doubtful debts. हम provision for doubtful debts और depreciation इनकी अभी डबल एंट्री बुक कीपिंग नहीं की. वो जब हम करेंगे तो हम इस पार्ट को ज़्यादा बेहतर तरीके से अंडरस्टैंड कर सकते हैं जो मैं अभी करने लगा हूँ. लेकिन for now, since we are going to be just focusing on financial statements only, so you need to know the procedures how provision for doubtful debts will be implemented. So before that, bad debts, no strings attached. Every time you see a bad debt, that is an expense in the income statement, right? There are no ifs and buts or any other variables involved there. Every time you see a bad debt, it's going to go straight as an expense in the income statement, right? But the provision for doubtful debts में जो change होता है, change during the year, how the provision for doubtful debts is changing during the year, that change goes to the income statement, right? Depend करता है कि वो change किस direction में है और फिर उसके मुताबिक हम देखेंगे कि हमारी income statement के अंदर वो as an expense treat होगा या as an income treat होगा. So since change can mean two possibilities, the change could mean increase in the existing provision for doubtful debts, or it could mean a decrease in the existing provision for doubtful debts. So if the provision for doubtful debts is changing in a way that it is going up in the current year, so the incremental change, that incremental change will go to the income statement as an expense. For example, if last year the provision for doubtful debts was 100 and this year you calculated this 10, let's say if last year the provision for doubtful debts आपके books में exist कर रही है at $800 and this year you calculate it at $1,000, so the incremental change is $200. So that is what goes to the income statement as an expense. Alina Sayed has asked, the question, if it keeps changing during the year, wouldn't there be instability of some sort, as it's not constant and it has to be rewritten every month? Alina, it's not going to be rewritten every month. It is going to be rewritten every year, once a year, right? At the end of every financial year, when it comes down to making your financial statement, only then you are going to analyze your provision for doubtful debts, just once in the year, right? So yes, I understand the question here that it is not a constant factor. It keeps on varying depending on the economic climate. And that has basically the nature of this analysis is as such, since this provision is to be calculated based on your customers, so the number of trade receivables you have and the amount they owe you, और वो ज़्यादा देर तो last नहीं करेगा. So you normally don't do it on a monthly basis. You only do it once in a year. You see कि last year कितनी provision for doubtful debts थी और इस साल के economic climate के मुताबिक आप नई provision कितनी amount से create करना चाहते हैं. And based on that one analysis, you will come to that conclusion that it's going to be whatever incremental change that you come across, that is what we will treat as an expense, depending on that, if that represents an increase Do we understand? It's going to be just once in a year, not every month. Okay. But if your provision for doubtful debts is showing a decrease over the current year, that means this year your credit and collection department has done their job very effectively. उन्होंने किसी ऐसे debtors को debts forward नहीं किया जिसकी shady reputation थी, या आपकी industry में generally economic boom आया हुआ है, so you don't really have to worry about bankruptcy of good debtors either. So there is a possibility that this year provision for doubtful debts may change in a negative direction. That means your provision for doubtful debts will show a decrease. So if that is the case, then incremental decrease जो भी आ रहा है, that incremental decrease, whatever is there, is going to be treated as an income in the income statement, right? Basically, provision for doubtful debts, since it is representing your likely loss. So if your likely loss is increasing, it will remain a loss, and that is why it is treated as an expense. But if the likely loss is decreasing and you have overestimated your loss, then you have to reduce this loss. And when you reduce that loss, it becomes a negative expense. And we don't treat negative expenses, we treat them like incomes. So that's why if provision for doubtful debts go down, the part by which it goes down, that incremental part, that decrease, is going to be treated as the income in the income statement, right? So the provision for doubtful debts, bad debts तो as a whole, जो भी bad debt आपने देखा है उसको as a whole write off कर देंगे as an expense in the income statement. But provision for doubtful debts के लिए आप उसको as a whole नहीं subtract करेंगे, आप उसको compare करेंगे कि last year के मुताबिक इस साल उसमें कितना incremental change आ रहा है. So जितना भी incremental change आ रहा है, अगर वो incremental change जो है वो increase को represent कर रहा है, then you will show it as an expense in the income statement, since provision for doubtful debts is a likely expense, a likely loss. So if that likely loss is increasing, so the factor by which it increases will be treated as an expense. But if the likely loss is decreasing, then the factor by which it decreases will be shown as a negative expense in the income statement, or instead of showing the negative expense, we show it as an income in the income statement. We will add it to the gross profit section. So if we understand the provision for doubtful debts treatment in the income statement, please give me your feedback on the participants window, right? It's just that part जिसके साथ वो change हो रही है. Hadia has asked, PFDD doesn't go to the balance sheet? No, it does. Provision for doubtful debts will go to the balance sheet just like this part. When you show your current assets and when you put trade receivables over there, you will subtract the entire amount of provision that you have calculated this year, just like depreciation का amount आप subtract करके लिखते हैं debtors में से. The provision for doubtful debts will go to the balance sheet and it will be subtracted in the balance sheet from its respective asset. Every provision you create, चाहे वो provision for depreciation है, या वो provision for doubtful debts है, या वो provision for unrealized profits है, या provision for contingencies हैं, बहुत सारी provisions अभी आने वाली हैं, अभी आई नहीं हैं, लेकिन जब भी कोई provision आएगी वो अपने respective assets में से हमेशा subtract होती है in the balance sheet. जैसे provision for depreciation we have already seen. A part of the depreciation provision goes to the income statement as an expense, and the total provision is subtracted from the non-current asset. Same goes with the provision for doubtful debts. A part of the provision for doubtful debts, which is that incremental part, that is going to go to the income statement as an expense or an income depending on the change, and the entire provision, the total amount of provision, will go to the balance sheet. Let me just write it down for your reference. So this is your income statement treatment. What will happen to the balance sheet? Balance sheet में you will write current asset section के अंदर, you'll write trade receivables, trade debtors or trade receivables, जो भी आप लिखना चाहते हैं. So you will put that amount over there, and then you are going to subtract the provision for doubtful debts. And in this case, the provision for doubtful debts, जो भी value आप यहाँ पे लिख रहे हैं, this is the provision for doubtful debts, the entire provision, the entire value, the entire provision for doubtful debts after the change. The change goes to the income statement, but after the change, whatever the updated value of the provision for doubtful debts is, that is going to be subtracted in the balance sheet, right? So we'll come to the balance sheet later on. अभी फिलहाल सिर्फ income statement पे focus करेंगे. Balance sheet पे हम आएंगे अभी. Don't worry. So far anything मैं ये सारी बाद में share भी कर दूंगा आपके Google Classroom में. But we understand this part. This part is what matters more. Balance sheet treatment is relatively easier, but this part is where you're going to most likely make a mistake. So what you see on the screen right now, if you understand this part, please give me your green check, and then we will start with a question. Marine and Manal. Excellent, right? Okay, so let's bring the question in. Chapter 12, end of the chapter exercise. There are two questions. We will do second question first. This is page number 132, solve वाला question. ये हम पहले करेंगे और question number 1 हम कल हमारी क्लास है, बिल्कुल है. कल हम question number 1 करेंगे, आज हम सिर्फ question number 2 करेंगे. So let me bring it to the notes here. Come on. Let me bring it to the notes. Yeah. Our 13th of October 2020. Add to that. That is ready to import. Good. Done. Okay, where is it? There you are. Okay, so let's take a look at this question. आप अपनी book पे ये question खोल लें because this is too small for you to read. I want you to have your own book open, page number 132, second question. We will deal with that. Now in this question, we will have accrued expenses and prepaid expenses. We will have depreciation charges. And now on top of that, we will have our final adjustment. That is the bad debts and the provision for doubtful debts. So once you have page 132 open on your books, please give me a green check. Then we will start discussing the adjustments. Minal? Okay. Now, let's see. So we have, Saul is a trader and his trial balance at 31st May 2016 is as follows. So we, right off the bat, we know our financial year, 31st May 2016 पे अगर वो ख़त्म हो रहा है, तो वो 1st of June 2015 से शुरू हुआ होगा. So our financial year over here is 1st June 2015 to 31st of May 2016. Remember, identification of your financial year is the most important bit of information, because if you interpret that wrongly, everything is going to go wrong. So that is why the first thing that you need to confirm is what is the starting date of your current financial year and where does it end. So 1st June 2015 से 31st May 2016 के दरमियान जो events हो रहे हैं, all of these events are going to be analyzed based on the accruals and matching principle, चाहे वो depreciation है, चाहे वो normal revenue expenditures हैं, and now चाहे वो bad debts या doubtful debts भी now. So we have the usual items here. We start with the freehold property and their depreciation provisions. We already know how to deal with those from our previous chapter. So you have this section dealing with your non-current assets. Then you have the trade receivables, and we know this is going to be the item which is going to be subject to some adjustments over here. And then you see the provision for doubtful debts over here, this part. The provision for doubtful debts exists in your books as $1,200. Just like provision for depreciation values over here. They represent the total of depreciations charged in the previous years. Same exactly is the case with the provision for doubtful debts. It tells you what have you brought forward from the previous year's provision. So ये जो provision for doubtful debts आपको trial balance में नजर आ रही है, ये last year की final value है. ये इस साल की provision for doubtful debts नहीं है, वो भी आगे adjustments में आएगी. So as Alina Sayed asked, do we have to do it monthly basis? But no, Alina, this was calculated last year. And now if you see on the next page, note number 3, you are going to calculate the provision for doubtful debts as 5% of the trade receivables once at the end of the current year. So that is how provision for doubtful debts is going to be managed. We will only revisit our decision of provision for doubtful debts once in every year, and that happens at the end of the year. So we will come to that abhi is pe. So this is your provision for doubtful debts already existing in your trial balance. And then let's take a look at the rest of the trial balance. There's nothing unusual. There is you can see there is discount allowed here, and we know the reason why discounts allowed now exist in your books. Discount allowed was just a precautionary measure कि आप किसी तरीके से अपने डेटर्स से जल्दी अमाउंट रिकवर कर लें और उसको पेंडिंग ना छोड़ें ताकि एज ऑफ डेट इंक्रीज ना हो, बिकॉज जैसे जैसे एज ऑफ डेट इंक्रीज होती जाती है वैसे वैसे उनके चांसेस बैड डेट होने के ज़्यादा होते जाते हैं. सो दैट इज़ वाई यू अलाउ डिस्काउंट to your customers so that you will recover these amounts quickly. And this amount given against discount allowed $3,220, it's a non-cash expense. It simply means that during the year बहुत सारे डेटर्स थे जिन्होंने आपके इस इंसेंटिव को अवेल किया था और आपको उनको ओवर द ईयर डिफरेंट टाइम्स पे $3,220 का अमाउंट फोगो कर दिया, आपने उसको राइट ऑफ कर दिया, आपने उनको माफ़ कर दिया. And that is a loss, 3,220, that you have to bear with, and that is a non-cash expense. Similarly, your suppliers can deploy the same maneuver on you. Your suppliers are also kind of insecure about their credit transactions, so they also gave you the option कि आप भी अब टाइम से पहले अपने डेट सेटल कर लें और डिस्काउंट रिसीव कर लें. So this is the amount of discount received that you earn from various suppliers by making prompt payments, earlier payments, quick payments. So we will treat this discount receipt as an income. We also have carriage inwards. So we will not forget to treat carriage inwards in the cost of goods sold section. The rest of your, there is rent receivable income. There are quite a few incomes in this case. You can see rent receivable over here, although the term says receivable, but we have already visited this part that the examiners are going to use problematic terminology. Rent receivable को आप trade receivable की तरह as an asset नहीं consider करेंगे, even though they both have receivable at the end. That does not mean that everything mentioned with receivable is an asset. You will have to, the final conclusion you will draw by seeing, analyzing the value. What side of the trial balance does it appear? If it is appearing on the credit side, it cannot be an asset, right? An asset must be on the debit side here. So rent receivable over here appearing on the credit side, the only conclusion you can draw over here is it's an income, rent income, right? So let's move on to the adjustments. So the rest of the adjustments you can manage. I am going to focus on note number 3 here because that is the new thing. The rest of the note 1, 2, 4, 5, and 6, they you know already how to deal with those. Okay, note number 3 is, it says included in the trade receivables is an irrecoverable debt of $1,800, and then the provision for doubtful debts is to be maintained at 5% of the trade receivables. So basically, there is a bad debt of $1,800. And then the provision for doubtful debts has to be adjusted so that it reflects 5% of the trade receivables as likely bad debts. So we understand note number 3. Give me a green check if we understand what it means. Note number 3 tells us that $1,800 का bad debt है जो अभी तक आपने write off नहीं किया था, और दूसरा ये कि आपके provision for doubtful debts इस साल के economic climate के मुताबिक उसको 5% of the trade receivables को reflect करना चाहिए. We'll come to that. So first thing first, we will find our trade receivables here, and we know that there is a problem with this. There is an $1,800, these are overstated by $1,800 because it includes a debtor for $1,800 which is no longer your debtor because वो bankrupt हो गया या whatever the reason was, वो bad debt हो गया. And the second note that I will make myself is, this is a bad debt to be treated as an expense in the income statement, right? So the trade receivables are going to be adjusted negative $1,800 because अब आपके trade receivables $34,600 नहीं रहे बल्कि $1,800 उससे reduce करना पड़ेगा क्योंकि आपके $1,800 के debtors bad हो गए हैं. And at the same time, you will not forget, you will make yourself a memory note over here that you will not forget to put an expense in the income statement for bad debts of $1,800. We understand the first part of the note number 3? Give me a green check. Right. Fajr, Adia. Okay, good. The second part is that the provision for doubtful debts is to be maintained as 5% of the debtor, right? So let's calculate the 5% of the trade receivables. So I'm going to do a working over here. Your trade receivables now, your trade receivables are not 34,600 but $34,600, right? Minus $1,800, right? That is your actual amount of trade receivables. So can you please tell me? $32,800, good. $32,800 is the actual amount of trade receivables. And the balance sheet में जब आप balance sheet में trade receivables लिखेंगे तो आप 34,600 के नहीं लिखेंगे, आप 32,800 के लिखेंगे, because 34,600 is the wrong value. It does not reflect the bad debt. So 32,800, then you will calculate the 5%, right? So 5% of 32,800 is how much? 1640. So this comes out to be 1640. So this is the provision for doubtful debts for the current year, right? This is you calculated for the current year, right? 1640. Then this 1640 is going to be compared with the existing provision. The existing provision is how much? That is given in your trial balance. Last year की provision, जो कि आपके trial balance में अभी तक exist कर रही है, that is $1,200, right? So this comparison of the two, right, that will give us the incremental change. So in this case, the incremental change is how much? It's $440. And since this $440 is representing an increase, do you agree with this? It is representing an increase from the last year, right? So that is why we are going to treat this $440 as an expense in the income statement, right? So the incremental part, that incremental change, that's good, Mahreen. Incremental change is going to be treated as an income statement. So how do we make ourselves some notes over here? So your provision for doubtful debts, let me switch to red. This becomes 1640, and that means this is going to go to the balance sheet. However, the difference between these two, which is 440, that is going to be an expense in the income statement. Do we agree with this? That your provision for doubtful debts in your trial balance is no more $1,200, but it will jump from $1,200 to become 1640. And that incremental change that happens, that represents $440 of increase, that is an increase in the likely loss and will still be treated as an expense in the income statement. So your income statement will have $1,800 of bad debts and $440 for provision for doubtful debts, right? And your balance sheet will be in your balance sheet, your trade receivables are going to go as 32,800, but then you are going to subtract the 1640 from there to arrive at the net debtors. So if you understand this treatment, give me a green check. It is only going to be, you're going to get more comfortable once you solve it yourself, right? Okay, great. So we have 6 minutes to go. So as much of income statement can we complete in these 6 minutes, and then you will complete the rest before tomorrow's lesson. This is not an assignment, but for tomorrow's question number 1 is what we will try tomorrow, but that's a tough one. So I want you to finish this one before the second question. The second question is going to be your assignment, not the first one. But the second question will require some additional discussion. So you start with the income statement and complete as much of income statement in the remaining 6 minutes. I will show you the answer when you need it. All right, let's get started. Yes, Alicia. We will make a three-column balance sheet every time there is provision for depreciation wala part, because the three-column balance sheet is actually relevant to the non-current asset section of the balance sheet. So every time you have to show non-current assets and there's a provision for depreciations, you will need the three-column balance sheet. Right. Good. Good. Carry on. So the part of your income statement is right in front. So in these 6 minutes, we won't be able to sort out issues. So you can at least complete up to the gross profit. In gross profit ke baad, you can see the other income section is also there. In okay, ठीक है. Yes. All right, Alina. No worries. Yeah, yeah. Sure, sure. Go ahead, Alina. Okay, I think you guys can take a screenshot of this section and try to complete the rest of the question. Whatever problems we come across, we will discuss them in tomorrow's class anyway. So I think we can call off the class. So if you need to ask any questions, stay back. Else you go. Thank you, Asma.